Well, after the last video, when I nearly got frostbite, I decided I'd come inside to do the rest of them for this quarter. This week, we're looking at number 10 in our series on life everlasting, death, dying, and the future hope. And this one is the fires of hell. And that's one that should make us stop and think just a little bit, because there are so many ideas about hell that really are not biblical. When we look at the word hell, we first of all have to say it is not a word that is found in Scripture. It is coming from a Nordic mythology. The Norse people of Northern Europe, the Anglo-Saxons and the rest, had this idea of a hell where people went to in the afterlife, but it's not what Jesus spoke about. He spoke about Gehenna. And Gehenna, of course, was the place outside of Jerusalem, this valley, where all the trash was burnt. And that is the idea that is given there. And of course, when trash is burnt, it's burned up. There's no hint of eternal burning in terms of duration. He talks about them being completely burned up in the Lord, that is, in Malachi 4 verse 1. Sodom and Gomorrah are pointed out as examples of eternal fire in Jude 7, and you need to go back and look at those in Genesis 2, but it's eternal in terms of consequence. The fires of Sodom and Gomorrah are not burning now. And, well, let's look at the other verses as well. Take the time to look at those. But the most important thing I want to stress is that we should really remove the word hell from our vocabulary, because we're not really talking about the same thing when we talk about hell. Yes, there is a lake of fire at the end. Yes, there is an extinction, if you like, of the wicked, but that is very different to having an eternally burning hell that is stoked up. And you've seen all the pictures from the medieval woodcuts and all the rest of the devils poking their forks into people and stoking up the fires and torturing people. Because what does that say about the nature and character of God, that even if he's not directly responsible for doing it, he at least is allowing it? And why would the devil do the work of God? I mean, it doesn't make any sense once you start thinking about what this really is all about. So, while this may seem to be a theological difference, I want to point out that it destroys your picture of a loving God. Charles Darwin, you might want to say he was the, quotes, inventor of evolution. Many others were involved, of course, but in his Origin of Species, he did away with the whole idea of a creator God and thought that all life forms developed from others. He says this: "I can hardly see how anyone ought to wish Christianity to be true. For if so, the plain language of the text seems to me show that the men who do not believe, and this would include my father, brother, and almost all my best friend, will be everlastingly punished. And this is a damnable doctrine." Was he wrong? I don't think so. Hell is one of those ideas, one of those beliefs that should be rejected by anybody who knows Jesus. Jesus said, "If you see me, you've seen the Father." And by that extension, we should say, no, God is not going to torture people for all eternity. Hypatia, again, someone who rejected Christianity back in the day, to rule by fettering the mind through fear of punishment in another world is just as base as to use force. In other words, if you think you're going to be tortured forever in the fires of hell, and that's the reason why you do good, that's just as bad as being tortured in the here and now. Robert Ingersoll, another critic: "Hell makes man an eternal victim and God an eternal fiend. It is the one infinite horror. Beyond this Christian dogma, savagery cannot go." In other words, this Christian belief, if I could call it that, is worse than paganism. And all too often we just allow people to say, well, I believe this and I believe. I have to say, absolutely not. Why not? because it's not the religion of Jesus. It is not what God is all about, and it destroys that relationship that we can have with a God who loves us. There is judgment. There is an end, but it's not eternal. And God weeps as his lost children go out of existence. Let's remember what God is really like and leave the fires of hell to the devil.